Hey, welcome back to my garage. Today I'm going to be working on my friend's 600RR here that's in for a refresh. On the last video, I took out the battery and found some interesting speaker wire. Uploaded an absolutely terrible time lapse that I didn't catch until editing this video right now. Pulled off the airbox, drained the coolant, removed the radiator, and finally pulled off the valve cover. On this video, I'm going to be checking the valves, adjusting them, and because I didn't listen to my gut, correcting a mistake that took several hours to remedy. So this is a bit of a new one for me. This is the cam chain adjuster, and we're going to be using a lockout tool here. And usually you check the valves with this in place, but on this particular bike, you rotate this counterclockwise until it stops and lock it into that position. You could probably do this with a flat blade and some vice grips, because this tool was it's like 80 bucks, and yeah. Not really worth it unless you're doing a lot of Hondas. Probably not going to be able to see any of this. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm rotating it clockwise and then locking it in with the black portion here each time I rotate until it stops. Alright, so we got our cam chain tensioner locked here, and now we're going to take this side cover off with a 17. Probably a little bit difficult to see, but there's a T mark at the borderline 12 o'clock side above that bolt, and then there is a little notch here that we're going to line the T up with. We're going to spin the engine over clockwise. Again, it's going to be pretty difficult to see, but there's a little mark on the exhaust cam that's EX, and we're going to want that to be flush with the cover here. So we're going to keep rotating the engine over until that lines up with that, and there's an intake one over here on this side as well. Right there. Oh, right there. I'm going to pull the spark plugs out so I can rotate the engine freely. See if I can fit this in here. Okay, no. This is like the perfect opportunity to totally rack your knuckles across all these sharp bits. Ooh, that one's super loose. Number 2. Number 3. And number 4. I think we'll throw on some new plugs while we're in here. Have you ever wanted to go back in time and undo a mistake? Yeah, this was a mistake. And granted, I did call out that it was really weird that we were removing the tension from the cam chain before checking the valves. So essentially what happened was I took the tension off the cam chain, and when I spun the engine over, the cam chain slipped, of course, because that's what it does when there's no tension on it. So this all came about because I was following the service manual here, and this is an official service manual. It's not it's like not ripped off, but there is a printing mistake. It has the tension relief right here in front of the valve adjustment instructions. So I left a note for anybody that receives this book in the future, but now we've got a problem. So what we need to do is we're going to need to pull the camshafts off so that we can retime the engine. Now, the problem with that is that the camshafts are not in the ideal location. Some are putting pressure onto the valves. So when I go to take the camshafts off, there's going to be a significant amount of pressure pushing up. So we're gonna have to be really careful with how we loosen these bolts so that we don't snap the camshafts. And once we do that, we can retime the engine. So we can set the bike to top dead center on the first cylinder. Or yeah, first cylinder, I believe. I'll have to double check that. And then we can set the camshafts back in the correct timing, loop the cam chain back on, tighten everything back down, and then, and only then, can we check the valves. And most likely we'll have to take the camshafts off again to adjust them. Might need some more leverage. Make sure not to drop these into the engine. That would be real bad. Before I pull the cams out, I want to safety wire our cam chain so it doesn't fall down and I can't retrieve it. And I'm just gonna pull this around the frame for now. These are going to be fun to get back in, I can assure you that. All right, our exhaust is out and our intake. All right, so I have some wooden dowels into the spark plug holes here to just kind of indicate where the pistons are at. I'm going to set the outer pistons at top dead center and make sure that my timing mark is set to the T. And I'm going to have to walk the chain as it spins, so I'll have to just kind of get a finger on there. But we'll reset it so that the outer cylinders are at top dead center, and then we'll drop the cams back in at the appropriate timing, and we should be good to go. Alrighty, so as we can see here, outer dowels are up, inner dowels are down, and we're at the T on the timing mark. We can get these out of here for now. This is going to be borderline impossible to film because I'm going to be fiddling with the cam chain trying to get the camshafts in the correct position, but we're going to reference cylinder 1 over here, and for the camshafts we're going to look at the edge here and see that little in. That has to be aligned with the valve cover, or the head. And then for our exhaust, it's going to be the EX on that side. And essentially what it's going to look like are the end two lobes are going to be more or less pointed out, so they're not going to be depressing the buckets at all. This is a good diagram of the position they should be in. And those are the lobes for the first cylinder. So I got the camshafts in and they are aligned with the cylinder head over here. The easiest way I found to kind of line them up was to get both cams into the chain and then just rotate one a couple teeth at a time until they're lined up. So they're not sitting flush, which is because some of the lobes are facing down, pushing or trying to push some of the valves down. So what we have to do is put the caps back on and then tighten out to in again in stages to seat these, and then we'll torque them, and then we'll finally be able to check our valve specs. All right, I've got the cam caps back in and all of the bolts are just kind of finger tight. There's a staging order on the cam caps themselves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and last but not least 20. And then we're going to keep staging these up till the caps are seated, and then we'll torque them. Okay, I've got the cam caps all snugged down. I love that there's an actual order on the caps themselves, makes it super easy. So now I'm going to torque them, and we're going to do it in the same order, 9 foot-pounds or 108 inch-pounds. All right, with the cams all set up, I'm going to put tension back on the cam chain here. Ah, there we go. And so that's back under tension. So now we can turn the engine over and a couple times make sure we reset everything, and we'll bring it back to top dead center where we were before. That was one full revolution, and much better than when the tension was off of the cam chain. We're going to start by checking cylinder 1 intake and cylinder 3 intake, and the measurement is 0.20 millimeters plus or minus 0.03. So let's start with 0.2. That is a little tight. That is very tight. Let's go down to 0.18. 0.18 is just about perfect on this lobe, and actually pretty good on this lobe as well. Yeah, like a slight drag there. We got like a slight drag on this one, so these seem to be within spec. 0.18. And number 3. That actually seems a little loose at 0.18. That fits in there as well. Let's go up to 0.2 if they're spot on. 0.2 is a little tight, so I think it's about 0.19. So within spec, yeah, 0.2 is too tight there as well. So far we've got 0.18, 0.18, probably 0.19, and 0.18. Awesome, in spec. So over on my bench, I have a little diagram here, and this is 0.18, 0.18. Cylinder 3 was 0.19, and this was 0.18. So the intake is 0.20 plus or minus 0.03. So anywhere between 0.23 to, and whoops, not over here. Anywhere between 0.17 and 0.23 is within spec. So next we're going to check 2 and 4's exhaust clearance, and we need to get that little line at the bottom to be at 12 o'clock. Exhaust clearance is going to be 0.28 millimeters plus or minus 0.03, so 0.25 to 0.31. Okay, so now we're looking at exhaust side on number 2 and exhaust side on number 4. Ooh, too tight at 0.28 here for sure. This side, also too tight. I'm gonna go try 0.25. That's still pretty tight. Let's check 4 real quick. That's tight. That's tight. Looks like we're definitely too tight on our exhaust At 0.25 it doesn't fit. That's the bottom of our range. So I'll keep trying until I find something that fits. That way we have an idea of where we're at. All right, so we're gonna spin the engine over again another 180 degrees so we can check the number 2 and number 4 intakes. About 0.18. Oh, 0.18 is about perfect. Another 0.18. 0.18. 0.18. Another 180. Now we're checking 1 and 3 on the exhaust side. 0.28 is too tight, too tight, too tight, and too tight. These are all real tight. This is still tighter than a 0.20. That's not good. And this is like a 0.20. That's tight for a 0.18. This thing is super tight. So I have all my specs here. I checked them twice. That's why there's a couple revisions. Sometimes as you rotate the engine over a few times, some will kind of loosen or tighten a little bit. And so it's good to check a few. All of our intakes are within spec. All of our exhausts are out of spec. They're all too tight. So some are really bad, like 0.12 here and 0.18, but 0.23 is not too far from the bottom range here. So what we're going to do now is take the cam chain tension off again and remove the exhaust cam. And then we're going to take all the buckets and shims out so we can measure those and figure out what new shims we got to put in. All right, now that I've got the cams out, I can go and start taking the buckets out and the shims. And I've got a nice magnet here that I'm going to use to lift the bucket up. And I want to make sure that we catch the shim so that it doesn't fall down into the engine. Usually they'll stick to the bottom of the bucket, especially if you have a nice strong magnet, like so. All right, so with our buckets and our shims out, the next thing to do is to measure each of the shims to figure out the thickness of each, and then to figure out which shims we need to replace them with to get our gaps to increase on the exhaust side here. All right, so the Honda manual says that the new shim should equal the measured clearance, which is 0.12 for this shim right here, minus the clearance that it should be, so 0.28, and then get the value here and add that to the original shim size. What's easier to me and makes more sense in my head is to take the clearance and subtract our measurement, and that gives us 0.16, and then we subtract that from our original shim measurement to get our new shim measurement. It's the same thing, you know, it comes up to the same value, but this just makes more sense in my head. Okay, so you can see my measurements here. The smaller number in the upper right is what the perfect number would be to replace it with, and then the NS number is the nearest shim that I have to that. Now, if you notice, there's one missing here. This shim is actually perfect for this bucket here, so we're going to take the old shim and put it in there. The rest are all new from my hot cams kit up here. We pretty much decimated the 1.95 and 190s, but you can order like little refill kits for those. So next thing is to get these back in the bike. I'm trying to find the best angle to do this, but it's kind of hard. I'll get the shim in first. Make sure it's nice and seated, and then lower the bucket on top. I'm going to apply a little bit of moly and engine oil mixed here and just put that right on top of the buckets. We're kind of hoping that we measured everything perfectly, and when we assemble everything and check our measurements that we won't have to come back to this point again. But sometimes when doing valve adjustments, you'll have to take the cams off and check these 1 or 2 times. Something to look out for that'll save you a lot of time is to make sure all of the shims are well seated before you put the buckets on. There have been times where I've jostled the engine a little bit and the shims will sit unevenly and throw the measurements off, so you get to tear the engine apart and do it again. Perfect. Now we just get the cams and caps back on here, and then we check all our measurements again and make sure we're in spec. Alright, so I put some more of that moly oil mixture on the journals, put the cams in, got them back into position here, and then got the caps on, torqued it all down. This is all good to go. I'm going to drop in some new spark plugs right now, and I think we'll be ready to put the cover back on. The bike had some Densos in there, but I generally buy NGK, so I got a set of NGKs to come in. I almost forgot the cam chain guide here. Alright, I'm going to do my best to get some RTV into the half moons here, just a touch for sealing. Don't need to go crazy. It's going to be a little hard by the cam chain side over here. The seals on the valve cover are still pretty pliable, so I'm just going to reuse them. This is a bit of a tight fit. There we go. All right, 7 foot-pounds on these guys. So oddly enough, my manual doesn't have the specs for the coil resistance in it, but I found a couple online that may or may not be relevant. What I'm really looking for is any big deviance between any of the coils to see if one of them's bad. I did have a R6 come through here a while ago that had bad coils, and it acted like it was like a timing issue. Alright, so secondary resistance of 1.5. Let's get the primary. About 13.26. Alright, let me check the other ones real quick. Alright, so the coils came out to be roughly the same. I think they're fine. We're gonna pop those back in. With the coils going back in, I think I'm going to say thanks for hanging out with me in the garage, and I'll see you on the next one.